In the darkness of a medieval night, light wasn't a right, it was a luxury. For the modern world, light is as simple as flipping a switch. But for a person living in the year 1200, the setting sun marked the end of the productive world. To push back the shadows, you needed fire. And in the Middle Ages, the quality of your fire told the world exactly where you stood on the social ladder. To understand the history of medieval candles, you first have to understand the two vastly different worlds of tallow and beeswax.
For the overwhelming majority of people, the peasantry and the urban poor, the only option was the tallow candle. Tallow is rendered animal fat, usually from cows or sheep. Making these was a messy, pungent process handled by chandlers. The fat would be boiled in great vats to remove impurities, and then a wick made of twisted hemp or pith from a rush plant would be dipped repeatedly into the liquid fat. The result was a greasy, yellowish candle that came with a host of problems. First was the smell. Burning tallow smells exactly like what it is, rendered fat, creating a heavy, meaty stench that filled small, unventilated huts. Second, tallow has a low melting point. These candles tended to gutter or sag in the heat, and they produced a thick black soot that stained walls and clothing. But the biggest issue was the wick. Medieval wicks didn't consume themselves. As the candle burned, the charred wick would grow longer and longer, causing the flame to flicker and smoke. You had to snuff or trim the wick every few minutes just to keep the light steady.
However, even these smelly, smoky candles were expensive. A single tallow candle might cost a laborer a significant portion of his daily wage. Because of this, most peasants didn't use candles at all. Instead, they used rushlights. These were made by stripping the skin off a metal rush, leaving a small strip for support, and soaking the absorbent inner pith in leftover cooking grease. They burned for maybe 20 minutes and gave off a weak, flickering glow, but they were essentially free. If you moved up into the world of the nobility or the church, the sensory experience of the night changed completely. Here, they used beeswax. Beeswax candles were the gold standard of the Middle Ages. They burned with a bright, steady golden flame. They didn't smoke, they didn't sag, and instead of the stench of a slaughterhouse, they gave off the faint, sweet aroma of honey. But beeswax was staggeringly expensive. The process of gathering it was labor-intensive, and the demand was astronomical. A single large cathedral might burn hundreds of pounds of beeswax in a single week. Because beeswax was a byproduct of honey production, and honey was the primary sweetener of the Middle Ages, the bee master was a vital figure in any great estate.
The church was the biggest consumer of light. In a time when most people lived in dark, windowless huts, walking into a cathedral filled with the light of 1,000 beeswax candles was a transformative, heavenly experience. This wasn't just for aesthetics. The church had a legal monopoly on holy light. It was decreed that only beeswax candles could be used on the altar during Mass, symbolizing the pure flesh of Christ. This created a massive industry. Towns had entire guilds of wax chandlers, who were separate and higher in status than the tallow chandlers. Because of the cost, light was a status symbol. If you were invited to a feast at a lord's manor, the number of candles on the table was a direct reflection of the host's wealth. In the royal courts, lighting the way was a formal job. Pages would carry torches or large candles called tapers ahead of the king to ensure he never stepped into a shadow. To have light to burn was the ultimate medieval flex.
The economics of candles also dictated how people spent their time. The phrase, burning the candle at both ends, comes from this era. It was a warning against wasting a precious resource. Most people's lives were governed by the sun. When it was dark, you slept. The only people who consistently worked by candlelight were scholars, monks, and high-end craftsmen, like goldsmiths, whose labor was valuable enough to justify the cost of the light. The candle industry also gave rise to the first time-keeping devices for the home. Since clocks were rare and expensive, clock candles were used. These were candles marked with lines or weights at regular intervals. As the candle burned down to a mark, you knew an hour had passed.
Some even had small metal weights embedded in the wax. When the wax melted, the weight would fall into a metal tray with a clink, acting as a medieval alarm clock. By the late Middle Ages, the Candlemas festival became one of the most important days of the year. Every family would bring their year's supply of candles to the church to be blessed. It was a moment of hope, a celebration that the dark half of the year was ending and that they had enough resources to keep the shadows at bay for a little longer. Candles remained the primary source of portable light for centuries, and while they seem simple to us today, they were a complex intersection of chemistry, class, and religion. They were the difference between a night of total darkness and a few extra hours of human connection, study, or prayer. Thanks for shedding some light on history with me today. If you're glad you don't have to smell burning cow fat every time you turn on a lamp, hit that like button and subscribe. Would you have been a Beeswax elite or a Rushlight rebel? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.